What if I told you there's a law school change happening right now that flips the entire admissions game on its head, but most applicants are still obsessing over personal statements? I'm talking about the thing that controls everything else, how law school gets paid for. Because starting this year, federal graduate borrowing is capped. Grad PLUS loans, is the blank check that used to cover whatever the school charged, that's now gone for new borrowers. And if you understand what that actually means, you're going to see something that most applicants completely miss. And if you're applying in 2026 or beyond, this affects your strategy more than almost anything else. For years, the law school financing model was brutally simple. A law school posts a cost of attendance, sometimes $80, $85, even $90,000 a year when you factor in living expenses. You borrow federal loans, and if there's a gap, Grad PLUS loans fill it, done. The system would say, here's X, and students borrowed X. And when borrowing is unlimited, tuition naturally increases, because it can. Schools didn't price based on what education should cost, they priced based on what the federal government would finance. And that's how you end up with a total cost of attendance that's basically the size of a mortgage. And students shrug it off and just say, that's what law school costs, because the money was there. And it was almost too easy to get. And when money's easy, people stop asking, is this actually worth it? Financially, mathematically, is the return on this investment worth it? But now the rules have changed, and they changed in two major ways. First, Grad PLUS goes away for new borrowers. And second, there are now hard caps on federal borrowing for graduate and professional programs. For professional programs like law school, the federal annual cap is $50,000 per year with a $200,000 lifetime cap. And so if your law school's total cost of attendance per year is $85,000 and the federal max is $50,000, you've got a $35,000 gap every single year. And across 3 years, that's over $100,000 you now have to cover some other way. Maybe it's through savings or family or private loans or work income. You got to find a way. Instead of the school setting the price and you just borrowing it, we've shifted to the government setting the max, and the school has to now justify the rest. Now, I want to read you something, because this is already happening. The following is from a real email sent by a law school after the Grad PLUS elimination. They wrote, and I quote here, "We know that deciding where to apply to law school is about more than rankings or coursework. It's also about the support you'll receive along the way. As federal loan limits increasingly fall short of covering the full cost of attending law school, WashU Law is introducing a new supplemental loan designed to help eligible JD students bridge that gap." Translation: we know the government isn't covering it anymore, so here's a private loan. They continue, quote, "The WashU Law Supplemental Loan is a private loan available exclusively to incoming JD students. Students may borrow up to $25,000 per year. The loan features a fixed 7.5% interest rate, no credit check, no collateral, and no additional fees." And then the kicker: we believe a WashU law education should be ambitious, collaborative, and accessible. Accessible. If accessibility requires a 7.5% private supplemental loan to attend, the word's kind of lost its meaning here. And I'm not singling out WashU here. I'm saying this is the new playbook. Schools are scrambling to plug the hole to fill that gap between what you can borrow from the government and what they want to charge in tuition. So let's talk about what this actually changes, because it changes three things that matter to everybody applying. The first big thing is, of course, tuition and scholarships. Under the old model, a school could charge you $85,000 per year and still fill seats because federal loans made it possible. Now, if enough students look at that $35,000 gap and say, I can't make it work, the school has a real problem. And they've got three options now. They could cut tuition, they could increase the scholarships they offer, or they could shrink the class size. And all three of those are going to hurt them, and they pose an existential threat to many of these schools. And so scholarships stop being about simply rewarding merit and they start being about making the program financeable, meaning you can finance the cost to attend. Merit scholarships become a pricing strategy to close the gap between what they want to charge and what you can actually borrow. And even schools that never really wanted to discount themselves much, they might be forced to. Because if enough students can't make the math work, seats are going to go empty, and empty seats are a crisis. Schools need to fill their capacity to finance their overhead. The second big outcome is that your outcomes, your bar passage rates, your employment outcomes, that's going to start dominating the conversation. If borrowing was easy, schools could emphasize things like, we live in a great city, we have amazing clinics, we have a supportive community, and all of that sounds really nice. But when there is a $100,000 gap across 3 years, you're going to start asking harder questions to see if you can justify what you're investing. Are you getting a sufficient return on it? You want to ask, for example, what percentage of graduates get JD required jobs? What are the median salaries? What's the bar passage rate? Are their scholarships conditional? How many students lose them? Because if you graduate and you're not making what you projected, the math, the loans, the debt, they're not going to care how beautiful the campus was. You want to gravitate towards schools with stronger employment outcomes. And those schools are going to be fine. They're going to adjust, they'll be able to compete, they're going to survive. But the schools with weak outcomes and high sticker prices, they are exposed because private loans are not a clean substitute for unlimited federal borrowing. Most private lenders are going to do credit checks. Most of them will require cosigners. And of course, the rates are higher. And private lenders are going to price risk. If a school has weak employment outcomes, a private lender might look at that loan and they're going to say, we don't like this debt. Or they're going to offer brutal terms that you're not going to want to take on. And if a school requires private underwriting to attend, if you have to go for private lenders, the population that can attend the school is going to shift. Now let's talk about who gets hurt here. A lot of people hear loan caps and assume it only hurts lower income students. But think about who got crushed hardest under the old system. It was the students who didn't have lawyers in the family, didn't have financial guidance, didn't really know how to evaluate law school outcomes. Those students were the most likely to trust the marketing, borrow as much as they could, and find out too late that it wasn't a good ROI. But in a strange way, the loan caps actually do act as a blunt form of consumer protection. They force you to ask the question earlier, will this realistically pay off for me? Now let's talk about the schools that feel this first. The most exposed programs are going to tend to be high-cost schools with limited institutional money, schools that have weaker employment outcomes, schools that relied on filling seats at high sticker prices, schools where most students already borrowed close to the full cost of attendance. When borrowing gets capped, net tuition revenue is going to drop. And once that starts, you're going to have a cascade of smaller class sizes, tighter budgets, fewer resources, weaker employment outcomes, and lower bar passage rates. It's more of a slow squeeze. It doesn't happen overnight. But some schools are going to shrink, some are going to merge, some are going to close. It's just basic economics. Now, here's the trap I want you to avoid. A lot of applicants will respond to all of this with one of two extremes. One extreme is where they say, law school is dead, it's impossible, it's over, I'm not even going to do it. Then you have the others who are more thinking they're in the special snowflake category saying, none of this applies to me, I'm going to figure it out later. And both extremes are wrong. The right response is you got to treat law school like an investment with uncertainty. That means you ask a couple of serious questions and you answer them with real numbers. You actually map this out using a spreadsheet. Number one, what is the total annual cost of attendance, including fees and living expenses? Schools are going to love to just spotlight tuition and bury everything else in fine print. You want to calculate the total. Second, what is the realistic federal borrowing cap for your situation? If it's below the cost to attend, you want to figure out what's that gap. And you're allowed to borrow $50,000 per year for professional programs, but if you've already borrowed for other professional education in the past, what you can borrow going forward might be lower. The third question is, how are you going to cover that gap? Is it going to be through savings, through family support, scholarships? Are you going to go for private loans? Do you have income from work? If you don't know, that's a problem. You got to figure it out. Fourth, you want to ask, what are the typical outcomes at this school? Not the outlier outcomes, not the top 1%, but the median. And this is where you want to look at the ABA 509 reports. You want to look at the American Bar Association data on employment outcomes, bar passage rates, JD required roles. Then finally, what's going to happen if you don't hit your projected salary? Are you still going to be able to pay your rent? Can you still live? If you have a problem, that of course matters. You want to know that now. And if you don't know the answers to these questions, you might not be ready to go yet. Now, let's take this back to the LSAT because that's where it all starts. That's where you have control. Of course, you can't control what the federal government does. You can't control what tuition is going to be, but you can control your LSAT score. And in this new environment where borrowing is capped, a higher LSAT score gives you options. Scholarships become less about rewarding merit and more about making enrollment financially viable. Your LSAT score is how schools are going to justify giving you that money. If your LSAT score helps them maintain their medians, raise their standing in the US News rankings, they'll be able to justify helping you close that financing gap. If you can get 5 more points on your LSAT, that might mean an additional $30,000 to $90,000 in scholarship leverage across 3 years. And your score gives you multiple offers that you can compare with each other, that you can negotiate against each other, and of course, you're always free to walk away. The schools need you more than you need them. Now, a lot of students think that because the LSAT no longer has logic games, it's somehow now easier. You've got logical reasoning as 2/3 of the test. Reading comp is the remaining third that's often neglected. But your prep doesn't change. It's got to be precise. You devote 2/3 of your study time to logical reasoning, since it's 2/3 of the exam, of course. Don't neglect reading comp either. You also need to build up your endurance doing full-length timed exams to build up your stamina. Most people underestimate the stamina portion. They spend too much time drilling questions, but never build up their endurance for back-to-back timed sections in 1-2.5 hour sitting. And that is a mistake because in this new era going forward, the difference between a 163 and a 168, just 5 points, could determine whether you can afford to pay for law school at all. Your LSAT performance directly impacts whether law school is financially viable. Now, here's what I expect you're going to see over the coming cycle. You're going to see more guaranteed scholarships, fewer conditional scholarships, as schools try to bring prices closer to what you can actually finance. You will be able to aggressively negotiate your scholarships, even though there's more competition, more people applying. We're going to see more scrutiny of conditional scholarships as applicants get smarter about the fine print. And you'll have a bigger divide between schools who have strong employment outcomes and the schools that don't. Now, the applicants that win in this environment do 3 things. First, they maximize their LSAT scores to create leverage to negotiate those scholarships. They evaluate schools based on cost and outcomes, looking at those ABA 509 reports, and they build a plan that's going to work even if their first job out of law school isn't $250,000 a year. Law school's not over. You can still make it worth the investment, but blind borrowing no longer makes sense. And the earlier you internalize that, the more power you're going to have. Because this year and beyond, the smartest applicants aren't the ones with the best personal statements. They're the ones who understand that the financing model changed and they adjusted their strategy before everybody else did. And if you think that way now, you're already ahead.